Hi everyone, my name is Dominic Arjado. I'm a web developer, and these are your guides, tips, and tricks to web development. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to integrate with an API using React Hooks and TypeScript, and also learn how to write tests for it using JS and testing library. So React Hooks is one of the features of React, which lets you use state and other React features in a functional component. Apart from that, you can create your own custom hooks on top of it. So the one custom hooks that I usually create is the integration with the API, which is what we're going to do today. So if you're already hooked, no pun intended, let's get started. So I'm just going to quickly show you what we'll be achieving by the end of this video. So this is just a simple UI which integrates with an API to get the list of posts. So while it is waiting for the API, it will briefly show you the loading state. And then finally, when the API comes back with a response, it will list the array of posts. So you see there's a loading state, and now it's displaying all the posts. And it's also good to know what the API that we'll be integrating so that we get to know more about that API. So we'll be using JSON placeholder. It's a free fake API for prototyping, and we'll just be using the get posts API. So this API just returns you an array of posts, which we'll be using to display on the UI. All right. So to quickly get started with React and TypeScript, we are going to use create React app. It's the officially supported way to create React projects or applications. And they have a template for TypeScript. So we can copy this command and run this in our terminal. So I'm going to change the project name to React TypeScript API hooks. So I already run this before, so you can just do this on your terminal. And once the installation is complete, you can open it in your code editor. So I'm going to use Visual Studio Code as my code editor. And I already did a couple of things here just to make this video short. So I added this configuration to run the extension Prettier. So I installed it here. And to make this, to utilize this extension, I have to write this settings.json under .vs code folder. And then this is my configuration for my Prettier extension. So Prettier is an extension that automatically formats the code for me when I save the file. So it makes me write codes faster. And apart from that, open your terminal. VS Code has a terminal in its UI, but you can also run it on the project folder here on your own terminal. So I'm just going to add some extensions here. So I'm going to add Axios. It's like a fetch, but with added features and extra compatibility. And then I'm also going to install testing library React Hooks. This is later for when we want to write tests for the React Hooks, the custom API hook that we'll be creating. And then we're also going to install Faker. So Faker will help us generate random data also for our tests later. So since Faker doesn't automatically install its types, we have to install types Faker as well. Oops, I forgot the yarn add. And you just run this command and it will install these packages on your dependencies. So I already run this before actually. So once you install that, we can get started. And to start our React app, you can just run this command yarn start. So it should automatically open here. All right, so you should see something like this and everything, that means that everything is working fine. And now let's create under source folder. We're going to create our types. So the first type that we want to create is the different state of the UI. So you know there's a default state, there's a loading state, and the success state. So we can create enum called fetch state. So enum is like a constant in TypeScript. I'm just going to export this. And what are the different states? It's the loading state, which I'm just going to use the same string, loading. Oops, I forgot the default. There's success state. We should also display the error state if that happens. So these are the different states. As you can see, if you're new to TypeScript, this is like equivalent to like fetch state on default, something like this. But if you're already using TypeScript, you can utilize this features of them of enum. And for example, you have a function that accepts fetch state, and you expect a new state, you can pass the type fetch state. So you can only accept one of these values. And you can also do comparison later. So like, for example, fetch state is equal to fetch state that default. So you don't have to keep writing the string. You can just use the key value here. All right. So of course you can write your own way of, you can make it all small, lowercase. That's completely up to you. And then the next one is the post data. I want to export this as well. So post data is the data that we'll be receiving from the API, because TypeScript by default doesn't know what the API is going to return. So we have to help TypeScript over here and define those data that we'll be receiving. So post data has these four data inside of it. So user ID is a number. So in TypeScript, if you're new to it, there are three primitive values. So one is number, there's string, and there's boolean. And the more complicated ones are the array, which you can put as array of string, or it's an array of object. So object is another one, which is what this post data is already a type object. All right, so that's that. So as you can see, it's a number. And then same for the ID is also a number. Title is a string, and body is also a string. So that's all we need to do for types.ts. And we're ready to create our custom hook. So I created a folder under source called library, and then I'm going to create a file called API hooks.ts. So if I have multiple API hooks, I'll usually put it under the same folder. And the convention I use is the same as the convention of React hooks. So for example, I need to integrate with a get post. The prefix is use get post. And first you want to do is create the use state for the fetch state. And let's import it from React. And the default value would be fetch state default. So we imported from the types that we created here, the enum, and use the default fetch state default as the initial value. So in TypeScript, it will automatically assume that whatever we set state should be under the fetch state value. So I can only do one of these four fetch state. If I try to write a string, it would show an error. So that's how TypeScript would help you catch this kind of errors. So I can even do a simple string which is equivalent to the default. It would still throw an error. So I should use this to set a new value. All right. The next one is the array of posts. So use state, and it will just be an empty array for on default. And when I try to hover on it, as you can see that TypeScript is giving it a type of array of never. And in order to, because by default, an empty array doesn't really give TypeScript the exact data that you'll be expecting when you set a new post. So you have to help TypeScript over here by adding this less than and greater than values, and then set the array of post data. So import post data from types and use it over here. So now when we hover onto it, it will be an array of post data, which is what we want. So if we try to do some array of string over here, we'll get an error by TypeScript. It should be a post data. Okay, so that's it. And lastly, just need to create the get post function, which should be asynchronous. And wrap it in a try catch. So in try catch, we want to set the fetch state to loading. And if there's an error, fetch state would be error. So after I set the state to loading, I will then call the API. So remember we installed Axios. That is what we're going to use to call the API. So this is the JSON placeholder endpoint to get the post. So Axios get in this endpoint, and then we will return the data. So to get the data, it's just rest that data. And then if you hover on the rest data, there's a type of any. Again, that's why we created the post data function, type, to help TypeScript over here. So in order to override this any type, you can do a type assertion. So type assertion keyword here is as post data. So now when I hover onto it, this is now the array of post data. And now we can use it to set the post from the rest data. So after we set that post, we can also set the fetch state to success. All right, I think that's about it. We don't just have to return. So same convention as the use state over here. See that React is returning an array. So that's also the convention I'm going to use. I'm going to return it as an array, post, and then fetch state, and the get post. So since this is an array, we don't want this to be overwritten by other code in the project. We can make this return as a read-only array. To do that, you just have to add ascons over here. And when you hover onto it, you see that there's a read-only. So if someone tries to, let me try this. Oh, later I'll show you in a bit. Okay, we're done in this file. We can now use this in our component level. So here I'm just going to remove this, rename this as container. We don't need a logo, so we can just delete this. And let's import our use get post. So this returns, for example, array response. I try to change the value of 0 to 1. That will be returning an error because these are read-only. That is why this is helpful to add ascons over here. Okay, so we know that the first element in the array is post, fetch state, and get post. So now we can display different states in the UI like this. So the default state is, the fetch state is default. Then we render. Here I'm using a fragment shorthand. This is actually the shorthand version of the fragment, because in React, if you're trying to render an element, there should be one parent element. You can do multiple elements over here, as React would complain. Oh, let's try this. You can do this. You need to have only one parent. All right, so I don't actually need actually, so I'm just going to use a fragment shorthand. And the description would be hello there. click the button below to get the list of posts. So get posts, and then on click, we can call get posts. Right, that's the default state. So if we try to see it in our current one, yep. Oh, I forgot the title. Should add a title above. Okay, so don't worry about the styles yet. We'll be adding styles later. And then let's try to create a fetch state for the loading. So this should be just fetching post. If there's an error. So it's really good to have an error state so that in case users try to get a post and there's a server error, somehow your backend server is unavailable, then they would know instead of just clicking and nothing happens. Okay, so for this one, we're just going to show something went wrong. Please try again. And then, of course, if that happens, you want users to retry. So it's just going to be the same button here and get post again. And lastly, wait for success. Render. Here are the list of posts. Here's the list of posts. And then we want to loop the posts. This. Then how you normally loop through in React is using the map function in array. Then render this. So in React, you have to add in the key value so that React knows what has changed in the UI using this value. We add a class over here, custom post, and we want to display the title. So as you can see, I'm using the ID dash then the title. So I'm going to do that here. Post title. That's the body, post body. And I think that should be it. Yep. Now, let's see. Let's try to, before we try to test our code, I just want to add in some styles. So I'm just going to copy this from my code over here. You can just pause and copy it. This won't be the main topic for this video. So we're just going to skip through the styles and just copy here. So once you copy that, it should look similar to what we have on the final code. As you can see, this is localhost. This is from my live website. And let's try it now. So this is the default state. Once I click, it should show the loading state. And there you go. It's displaying the list of posts. So that was quick and easy, right? Now we are actually ready to write tests. So let's get started. So Create React App already has this test over here. So we can just stop the server and try to run the test with this command. And I like to show the coverage of the test, so I know that if I miss a line of code, it will display here. And this will definitely fail because we changed the existing code of Create React App. So let's just start from scratch. Import app over here. Since this is app.test.tsx, we should be testing app.tsx. Normally, I wrap it in a describe block. And then normally, I create a function, render component. And then render. So using the testing library, which is already installed by Create React App, we can render our component in a test environment. And then I would also want to just initiate all the text. So, you know, in different state, we have different text. Yeah, so I'm going to write for the default text. This is the value. Hello there. We're going to use all the different text in each state to verify our test cases. So that's default text, is loading text. We was fetching post. Error text. Error text is this one. And success text is here's the list of posts. Oops, we should be using double quotes since we are using single quotes inside of it. Okay, then for our first test case, we just want to check whether the default state is correct. So it should render default state. First, we want to render our component. So calling this function over here. And then we just simply check whether the element that contains this text is in the document. So to do that, you can import screen, one of the library of testing library, and it exposes a function query by text. So there's different kinds of query. There's query by role, test ID text, title, placeholder text. You can check it out in the document. So for here, we're just going to query the text. And then we expect, so this is where the test case will be doing its check to check whether it's true or false. So state element needs to be in the document. So if this fails, then our test case would not be passed. I mean, we will not pass our test case. So for example, let's try checking instead of default text, loading text, you would see that the test case would fail. All right, so let's just do that here. Revert it back. Now you can see using the dash coverage, it shows me which lines are uncovered. Line 33, I'm not looping through the post yet because I haven't did the test case for success state. So that's why it's not covered. So there's also a couple of other lines which I haven't covered. So let's do that. So for the loading state, error state, and success states, I'm going to mock use get post because I don't want to actually do actual fetch to the API. Reason being, you want your test case to be faster, and also for instances where your server or your backend server is unavailable, then your test case would fail. But that doesn't necessarily mean that your code in the front end is not working properly. And also, you don't want to overload your server for just running this test case. So those are the reasons why. So for the loading state, it should render loading state on loading. Before we render our component, we want to mock use get post. So to do that, we can use just function called spy on. We need to pass the object of the API hooks. So to do that, you can import it like this. Since by default API hooks is not exporting as an object, you can do that by doing an asterisk as API hooks from the library API hooks. So this will return an object of each function that you are exporting. So it will be just an object of use get post. So you pass this API hooks here, and then the name of the function use get post. So now I'm spying on use get post, and I can mock it. I can mock the return value. So it will be an array of these three values over here. So for the loading state, I just need to pass an empty post first. And then the fetch state, I'll initiate it here, and I can import it from the types. And loading. And then this is get post. I'll just pass a mock function by Jess. So now, before I render the component, this will actually return here using this value that I mocked. Now I can render the component and I can do the checks. So for example, I try to check for default state, default text, it would fail because now it is loading. The fetch state is now loading. You can see it failed. So it can just be fixed by passing the loading text, then it should pass. All right. So same thing for error state. We'll be doing the same thing. We just can copy it, change this fetch state to error, and the text should be error text. So now if we check the test again, all right. And finally, just the success state. On success, you change this to success. Let's do that. So as you can see, I'm still not covering line 33 because ideally on success state, there should be an array of posts. So let's just define it here and covering this, we can copy this. So instead of copying this actually, remember that we installed Faker. So it's a library for generating fake data. This makes our test more robust because we are not hard coding the result. We are generating different kinds of values in the data. For this one, just a random number. Same for the ID. For the title, we can use faker.lorem and sentences. In this library, you can actually check the documentation. They provide different random data you can use. Yeah, and especially useful for writing tests. And then for this one, it's just faker, same lorem, but sentences. So this one is just one sentence. This is multiple sentence. All right, so we need to pass it here. And we can do extra checks to verify that our post over here is rendering. So right now I'm just adding one source. I think that's enough, but you can render 3 and check for this 3. That's completely up to you. So for the sake of this video, I'm just going to use 1, and I'm going to check for the title whether it's rendering. Remember, I use the ID and the title combined into one element, h3 or heading 3. So I need to check exactly the same. Post element, post title element. And also same thing, we're going to query the text of post title. So we expect post title to be in the document. You can, that should be it. Let's check it out. All right. And yep, we achieved 100% for app.tsx. That's great. Now we're ready to write test for API hooks. Let's just copy the name and add that test.ts. So same thing, we import use get post from API hooks. Normally I name this as API hooks utilities, then wrap it in use get post to describe what we are testing. And then same thing that we did here, we are creating a function. A reason being, like for example, your component changes the name, for example, you did this instead of render component, you have to, if your component name changes, you have to change each of these, and that's more work to be done instead of just this, and we can just rename these 4 items over here. Yeah, that's why I create a function on top of it. Then in case I change the name of the function, it will be easier. So render custom hook, and then remember we installed testing library React Hooks to render the hook. So it's a different function, a different library from rendering the component. So for rendering hooks, you will use the library render React Hooks. All right, so and we just pass this anonymously like this, and we're good to go. Let me just check. Yep, and now we can check for the initial values. So it should return initial value. And we can render the hook, render custom hook, and we can check for hook the result, that current. So this will return the current values of the hook. So this post, get state, and get post. We just need to check whether the initial values are correct. So actually we are expecting post to be an empty array for the default. So it should be to be equal. So actually if it's an array or object, you cannot do to be check here, because it will be like checking empty array, this will be false. So to do a deep checking, it should be 2 equal. This only applies to arrays and objects. So for strings, you can use to be string number or value boolean, but for arrays or objects, you need to use 2 equal. Then for fetch state, since this is a string, you can just be to be, and you can import types default. And lastly, the get post, you just check for the type of get post. It should be a function. All right, this should pass our test case. And there you go. Next one, it should have expected endpoint. On API call. Basically, we need to check that it is calling for the correct API, this endpoint, and it's also calling get, Axios get. So to verify that, we actually need to spy on Axios, because we don't want to actually call the server, right? So spy on, import Axios, and the function will be get, and just mock resolve value. We are mocking resolve value because it's a promise. So if it's not a promise, you can do a mock return value. But if it's a promise function, then it should be using mock resolve value. So it should be an object data. We just pass an empty post for now. And then let's render the hook. Then we don't need to check all of this because we are already doing that here. Because we just need to verify that the Axios get spy is called, and it's calling this endpoint. So we just need get post. So since this is an array, we can just count the index of get post 0, 1, 2, and from this. So get post is on the index 2 of the result, and we need to wait for it. So let's do an asynchronous here and wait for get post. So once it finishes, we expect that Axios gets file was called once, and it should also verify that it was called with this argument. This is the endpoint. All right, let's try this out and see whether our test case passed. As you would see, we have our test case actually passed, but we got a warning from React saying that we should wrap it in act function. That's because it is updating the states over here. After we finish the call, we will be changing the sets of fetch state to loading, then success. So those kinds of things, we need to wrap it in an act when we're updating the states in a testing environment. So we can, by doing this, we still need to do an await in the act and then pass a sync here. And that should remove the warning that you will get. All right. So now what we need to do next is to check whether we have the expected states during the API call. So we are expecting to be getting loading while we're waiting for the API to finish. So let's check for that. Should have expected states on API call. Again, asynchronous. And let's just copy this. And we're doing a different. So if we do an await here, we'll actually get success already. So we want to check whether it is setting to loading state when we call it. So we can remove the await here. And let me just show you. Let's just check for the current state over here. So same thing, we can just get it from the current. This would get updated by the time we get post. So post is still an empty array, but the fetch state would be loading. Let's save that. We don't need this anymore. As you can see, it did pass our test case, but again, we get a warning that we should be waiting for this to finish in order to prevent unexpected behavior. So we just need to store it in a variable and then do an await after we do the check. Because after we await, the fetch state would be already success on this point of time. So we can do that check later. But for this one, we just need to check that is setting the state to loading. All right, then there's no warning. And we can move on to our next test case, which is an error. We have expected states API error. So if there's an error on the API, so for example, yes, Axios get rejected, return a rejected value. So instead of resolve, it rejected. So it will throw an error on our try catch over here, and it will go to this. So the fetch state should be error. So we can do the checks over here. So we don't need to do this anymore. We can just revert it back to await. And we are expecting the fetch state to be error. This should be pass as well. All right. I don't know why it's already 100%, but we haven't covered success state yet. But that's fine because by here it already covered fetch state success. But it's still good to write a test case separately on API success. All right. So let's just copy this as well. But this should be mock resolve, and then this is data and empty array. So of course, on API success, you want to check whether it is updating posts. So we should create an array of posts. So I'm just gonna copy this data. Again, we're gonna generate random post data. So remember we did that for here for the success state. Let's copy that and import figure. Okay, so we are passing the response, the mock response to this value. And then we are expecting post to be the rested data over here. And then fetch state should be success. This should pass. All right, and there you go. We are done writing tests for our React TypeScript API hooks. That was quite easy, right? I hope you learned a lot from this video, and let me know what are your thoughts and comments or suggestion. And don't forget to subscribe and like and share. Thank you everyone and have a good day. Bye.